Tennesseans were quite a polite people. You know,
Yeah, put it on your mouth.
if you say excuse me, we will step aside in our person and let you pass. If you turn on your blinker in your car, we'll open up the gap and let you in, unlike, you know, rude big city drivers. We're polite people. If you ask us nicely, to wear a mask, you know, it's not that bad of an inconvenience. If it makes you feel better, I don't mind doing it. But when you start exercising unlawful authority and telling me what to do, that is the conduct of a tyrant. And it is not to be tolerated in this republic. And we are a republic. Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution says that the United States shall guarantee every state a republican form of government. So very few citizens even know what that means today, but they were talking about the character and the form of our government. And so a republic was Edmund Randolph, who was a lawyer from Pennsylvania. He said no state ought to be able to transform itself into a monarchy. So clearly, the founders, when they put that in there, that the United States shall guarantee a republican form of government, they were talking about form of government. We are not going to have a monarchy. And that is the conduct of Governor Lee and the mayors and the county's officials across this state, is they're acting as monarchs in a tyrannical manner. The Tennessee Constitution, how many people here, I'm hopeful, how many people here, raise your hands, how many people here know that we have a Tennessee state constitution? So we have some people that do not know that we have a state constitution. This constitution is our shield and our armor. And the rights stated in the Declaration of Rights in this constitution are our sword. And we are dressed for battle with this constitution armed with us. If we look at Section 25 of the Tennessee Constitution, and first let's consider Black's Law Dictionary definition of martial law. Martial law is when you exert some form of power over civilians on domestic territory. That is the definition of martial law. So knowing that, let's look at the Tennessee Constitution, Article 1, Section 25, Declaration of Rights. That martial law, in the sense of the unrestricted power of military officers or others means governors and mayors, to dispose of the persons, liberties, or property of the citizen is inconsistent with the principles of free government and is not confided to any department of the government of this state. They do not have constitutional authority to exert martial law as they are doing. It is plainly unconstitutional. They can't do it. So stepping back to what is a republican form of government, it's one that adheres to its constitution. So they said, you know, no state can transform itself into a monarchy. So we knew we didn't want a king, right? We just went through that when we declared independence. We didn't want kings. We didn't want monarchs. We know that it's not a democracy because we have an electoral college, you know, for number one. And the founders knew that the many are easily deceived, and we're not a democracy by any standard. And by default, we're not an oligarchy, rule of the few. But there's a ruler, and the ruler is the law. And that law, the supreme law here in Tennessee, is this Constitution. And under the Supremacy Clause, the Constitution of the United States. And so, rule of law, that's who rules us. And we, the people, ratify those constitutions. In Tennessee, Thomas Jefferson said that the Tennessee Constitution is the least imperfect and the most republican. And by far, the Tennessee Constitution is superior to every constitution of any state in this union, and in many ways it is superior to the Constitution of the United States. And Tennesseans used to brag on the fact that we have the best, least imperfect of all constitutions. But many of us don't even know that we have a Constitution, and we don't even know. So some of you raised your hands that you knew that we had a state constitution. Have you ever read the Declaration of Rights in here? It is incredibly powerful. Article 1, Section 1, that all power is inherent in the people, and all three governments founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness, for the advancement to those ends, they have at all times an unalienable, indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. We have a constitutional right to reform our government. So the Constitution, here's why it's important. Our founders declared independence from Great Britain because of declared acts of tyranny. Those acts of tyranny are stated in the grievances of our Declaration of Independence. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasion on the rights of the people. That was a grievance in our Declaration of Independence. He has altered fundamentally our forms of government. He has subjected us to mock trials for them of their murders on the inhabitants of these states and for depriving us of the benefit of trial by jury. Those grievances that they stated in the Declaration of Independence are the same grievances that are happening in this country today. And so lawfully, under the supreme law of the land, we have a right to reform our government. So how do we reform our government? But first let's take a look at, and this is one of my favorite. This is section 2, Article 1, Section 2. That government being instituted for the common benefit, the doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. It is absurd for us to not stand up for our rights. It is absurd of us to not defend our Constitution. It is slavish and destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. So this is the process the founders put in place for us. And I am the first person in the history of Tennessee to exercise my right to reform my government in a formal remonstrance that was received and recorded in both houses of the Tennessee General Assembly. That right and how I exercise that is in Article 1, Section 23. It says that citizens have a right in a peaceable manner to assemble together for their common good, to instruct their representatives. We have a right under the Constitution to instruct our representatives, and to apply to those invested with the powers of government for redress of grievances or other proper purposes by address or remonstrance. That is your most powerful constitutional right. That is your voice in government. It is the voice and power inherent in we the people. So how does that right get exercised? Is you find a common purpose. We want term limits. Or we're not okay with these tyrants, monarchs, declaring martial law over civilians. We're not okay with that. So you go around and you get a bunch of signatures. Now this isn't just a petition that you give to a lawmaker. This is a remonstrance, because a remonstrance is a formal written protest against government officials or government policy. So you go around and you get all your signatures, you state your facts. They're issuing a mandate for masks, or we have corrupt judges across this state. You state your grievance, and the facts proving that grievance, you make your argument. Well, Article 1, Section 25 says you can't have martial law. I think that's a pretty good argument, because what you've done is martial law. And the United States Constitution guarantees a republican form of government, and monarchies are expressly prohibited in the United States Constitution based on the words of Edmund Randolph at the ratifying convention. So you state your argument, and then you state exactly the redress that you want. You want the General Assembly or to issue order that the governor, these mayors, cannot institute martial law. They cannot mandate the control over civilians. It is your most powerful constitutional right. And the fact that I am the first person since 1850 to even file a petition in the General Assembly is prima facie evidence that that right has been oppressed against all people across this nation, not just here in Tennessee. And this right exists also in our First Amendment right. And everybody thinks First Amendment is freedom of speech and freedom of religion, which is true. But the last phrase says to petition for redress of grievance. And very few people know what that means. And I am working so hard. And I ask you guys out there to please stand with me and talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, and talk to your family that we have to restore this right in this country. Everything, literally everything that is wrong in this country is because of the oppression of this right. If we look at the Black Lives protesters out there and some of the unlawful conduct that bad police officers are doing, if citizens knew that they had this right to remonstrate, and they started off going to the superintendent or precinct captain of that police station and said, you know, this cop just roughed me up unlawfully. And if they didn't do anything, you know, because of cronyism, then you step it up until eventually you get to the General Assembly. Now here's another part that's more important. Papers are easily ignored. And mine's a prime example. In my remonstrance, I'm demanding reform of our corrupt judiciary. We have an incredible problem with corrupt judges across this state, stealing children under color of law through child protective services. We have incredible corruption going on in family court cases. You name it. These guys, and the problem with that is twofold. Is the right of remonstrance has been oppressed. You know, that if you want to complain against a judge, you can do a civil complaint, but it'll never go anywhere because the judges always dismiss those complaints. If we had the right of remonstrance and could go to our legislative house, we wouldn't have a problem with bad judges. If people could protest police brutality in our legislative houses, we wouldn't have police brutality. If the people across this country, and I'm sure there's about 90% of us that want term limits in the United States Congress. Well, if 90% of us got together and signed a petition under the first and exercised our First Amendment right, we have that right to present that to the United States Congress just the same as we have that right to present it to our General Assembly or our governor or our Tennessee Supreme Court. That is a constitutional right that we have to do that. So it's in their rules of order. So if you guys are familiar with court proceedings, they have rules of civil procedure, rules of criminal procedure. And those are the procedures that lawyers, attorneys, and judges have to follow in legal proceedings. In our legislative houses, they have rules of order. And Rule 15 of the Tennessee Senate, Rule 22 of the Tennessee Senate, read that after a brief statement is filed with the clerk, petitions shall be received and read at the table. So this is how you do it. You state your grievance. I don't want to wear a mask. It is unlawful that you order me to wear a mask. And you present that to your district representative. He files it in, and it gets read in front of the entire General Assembly, and they have to consider it. They have to consider your argument. They have a duty to do that. That is powerful. And we have that same right in the United States Congress, in the House of Representatives. In the United States House of Representatives, it's Rule 12. And it says that representatives shall, and shall is a duty, representatives shall file petitions with the clerk of the House. It is incredibly powerful, this right. What happened, how we lost this right, was during the Civil War, there were so many petitions that the legislative houses were receiving, including the United States Congress. They were getting petitions for and against slavery. And the House of Representatives in the United States Congress said, we're just not going to take petitions anymore. And that lasted for 5 years until James Madison, or John Quincy Adams, I think, he went back in and argued, and he said, the right of petition is fundamental to our form of government. It's a First Amendment right. We put it at the top because it's so important, like freedom of religion and like freedom of speech, to petition for redress of grievance. So he argued, and it was reinstituted into the United States Congress, but we were healing from the Civil War. And then we got into productive times, and the people just eventually forgot. And quite honestly, I'm sure it comes from the judicial branch, is they have oppressed this right, and they deceive us. If you look at, I've got a video on my YouTube channel. It's called Paid For in Blood, Betrayed, and Must Be Restored. And I go through the entire history of this constitutional right. And I show you in the Legislative House journals how petitions were presented, how they were considered, and how they were decided in that video. But now the government, they seriously do not want people to know that we have this right, because it is so powerful. It is our voice in our government. Here's a perfect example of what this right is about and how to understand it. Say you're going on vacation down to Florida, and you got two kids in the back. You got an older sibling and a younger sibling. And the bigger one starts picking on the little one. And you know, everybody knows that happens, right? You always have some bullying going on with older siblings, right? And so the little one's like, Mom, Dad, would make him stop. And they just ignore it. That's bad parenting, isn't it? To allow an older sibling to bully and torment a younger sibling is terrible parenting. And that is what our representatives, that is what our government does when we complain now, is like that bad parent. They just ignore it. And if we don't, I'm trying to play the middleman here with the government and with the people, because we are getting very close to large-scale civil unrest and insurrection. And these problems that we are having in this country, they would not exist if we had this right, and this right were upheld. Not if we have the right, we of course have this right, but if the right were not oppressed, and if it were upheld, we wouldn't have these problems, and the anger and the oppression of rights would stop. It wouldn't grow, because if you walk in and you go to the General Assembly and say, this police officer, he just beat me up. You know, here, look at, I'm all black and blue, or here's pictures. And they just, you know, like those bad parents, just say, oh, we don't care. They're going to look terrible. And they're not going to allow themselves to look terrible like that. Everything in our legislative houses is video recorded. And you can go look at everything that happens in there. And so when we go to our government and say, you know, this mayor is acting a monarch, and it is expressly prohibited in Article 4, Section 4. And he's instituted martial law in violation of Article 1, Section 25. And then they just say, well, we don't care. They're going to look stupid. And that's not going to happen. So this is what I want people to start doing. And this is your call to action right now, is I want you to call your senator and your representative. You probably have 2 representatives and 1 senator. I want you to call them and tell them to reinstitute and start upholding the right of remonstrance. I want you to, I'm going to hand out some pages here. If somebody would come up and pass these, if someone would come up and pass these around, you can find me through this. It has all of my social media pages, my website. I am prolific on Facebook. I talk a lot about this stuff on Facebook. I evidence the unlawful conduct of the government on Facebook. I don't hold anything back. I'm not afraid of them. Because here's a perfect example of why the Tennessee Constitution is better. The First Amendment just says we have freedom of speech. Well, Article 1, drop my mic. This is our freedom of speech here in Tennessee. This is far more powerful. The free communication of thoughts and opinions is one of the invaluable rights of man, and every citizen may speak, write, and print on any subject, being responsible for the abuse of that liberty. But in public capacity, the truth thereof may be given in evidence, and in all indictments for libel, the jury shall have a right to determine the law and the facts under the direction of the court, as in other criminal cases. So you think about how the Tennessee founders protected our right of free speech in our Tennessee Declaration of Rights. That is far more powerful than that simple statement in the United States Constitution that we have freedom of speech. And so that's why we have to restore the Tennessee Constitution. We, again, as Tennesseans, need to start bragging that the Tennessee Constitution is the best. Tennessee, with my work, is ground zero for restoring this republic, the entire republic across all 50 states. It's going to happen here in Tennessee because of the work that I'm doing with citizens that are standing beside me. And we're going to restore the right of petition for all citizens. And once it happens here in Tennessee, every state government across this country is going to have to follow us. We are ground zero. Tennessee is the volunteer state. And there is a reason for that. It's because we stand when we need to. My 5th great-grandfather, 6th great-grandfather were Tennessee pioneers. The Tennessee pioneers, a lot of them came out of Virginia and they came out of North Carolina. And the reason that they left is that they were sick and tired of the class system under the British monarchy. And that class system started to take place in our country. And they're like, heck with this, I'm heading for the hills. And so they left North Carolina, they left Virginia, and they came here to Tennessee. That's what's in our blood here, is men like that who knew that a man's worth is decided by his character and by the strength of his back, and not who he knows. And so that's why Tennessee is ground zero to restore this republic, because there are so many good, strong people here that will start to take action. And the rest of the nation is going to be grateful for what we do here. And I can tell you already, the entire nation is watching what's going on here in Tennessee. So my remonstrance that I filed in the Tennessee General Assembly, I stated my grievances. I want reform of the judiciary. They're corrupt. Our rights are oppressed. I want constitutional rights protected again. And I stated some other grievances. It was a 72-page remonstrance with 700 pages of appendix. It was a beast. Well, they announced it on the House floor, and you could hear a pin drop. There was 98 members in the full House. You could hear a pin drop. They were like, what just happened? Because they had never seen that before. And I'll tell you what happened was the voice and the power of the people just woke up, that we're going to start asserting this right again. So, but they didn't read my petition, and they haven't decided my petition. So I took them to court. And I filed a petition for writ of mandamus against the speakers and clerks of both the House and the Senate, heard in Davidson County Chancery Court. And I said, you know, I asserted my right to reform my government. It is clearly unlawful. The conduct of the government is clearly in violation of the Tennessee Constitution. You can't do that. And they have to decide. They have to hear it, they have to read it, and they have to decide it. You know, they don't have to tell me yes on everything I want. They can tell me no, but they can't ignore it. Because that's that bad parent sitting in the front of the car letting the older sibling bowl the younger sibling. They can't ignore it. Well, there was a lot of corruption in that case. A deputy attorney general falsified my petition of remonstrance and filed it into the court. She took my 72 pages and cut it down to 13 pages and said, here's a full copy. And not only that, this deputy attorney general, she changed my words. I had a jurisdiction statement, and I said, this is a formal written protest and a public petition on behalf of all Tennesseans. That was the first sentence in my jurisdictional statement. The deputy attorney general changed that and said, this is a complaint. So she falsified and submitted a counterfeit version of my remonstrance, which is a legal document recorded in the journals of both houses. So I am in the Tennessee Court of Appeals now, and because so many Tennesseans are standing with me and watching, the Tennessee Court of Appeals has agreed to live stream this case to the entire state of Tennessee. And that case is to be heard on August 6th at 10 a.m. Now, one of the other things that I'm arguing is if you look at Article 1, Section 23 of the Tennessee Constitution, this is the PDF version that's on the Secretary of State and General Assembly websites. If you look at the cover, it says it was prepared by the Office of the Clerk of the Senate. So I grabbed this off the General Assembly website. The last phrase in that PDF version The last phrase of Article 1, Section 23 says, by address of remonstrance. Of remonstrance is what it says. So I was arguing in court saying that because it says by address of remonstrance, the government has to address my remonstrance. Well, this snarky, corrupt Deputy Attorney General got up and she said, well, the Constitution actually says by address or remonstrance. So or is a conjunction, and we have a choice. We have a constitutional right to orally address any power of our government, including the governor, including the Tennessee Supreme Court, and including the General Assembly. We have a constitutional right to do that if it's a grievance or proper purpose. Well, I stood up and I said, well, good grief, now I know that my government has deceived me through a constructive fraud and a false version of the Tennessee Constitution. I've been tricked by my government to not know that I have a constitutional right to address them. So I said, I want to see the original. I want to see the original Constitution. And so I did. I went down to the Tennessee archives, and I know Vince McGrath, he's the chief legislative librarian. He helps me with a lot of research down there. And he said, well, you can't see the originals, but there's a digitized version on the Secretary of State website. And I said, baloney. I said, I want to see the originals. I'm in contention with the speakers and clerks and a Deputy Attorney General. I want to see the originals. And so they stepped it all the way up to the Secretary of State. And because of the work that I'm doing, and because they're afraid of the power of remonstrance that I am awakening in the people, they let me see it. It's kept in cold vault storage. They raised the temperature over about a week, and they brought it out. And I had an assistant with me, and we went through and read it. And it does, in fact, say by address or remonstrance. And you can see it on the Secretary of State digitized version of the Tennessee Constitution. It clearly says that we have a choice to choose to protest or approach the government for proper purpose by address or remonstrance. So I want you guys to call your senators and your representatives and tell them this is ridiculous. Fix the last phrase of Article 1, Section 23. Here's what this is. So now that I'm in the Court of Appeals, the Attorney General, Herbert Slattery III, the General Solicitor, Blumfield, and the Deputy Attorney General, Klinefelter, they all three signed the appellee reply brief to my appellant's brief. All three of them signed the front of it. So this is the highest ranking officials of our Office of Attorney General signed on to this appellee brief against me. And here's what they argue, is that the government doesn't have a duty to present the Constitution to the people. And because the government doesn't have a duty to present the Constitution to the people, they don't have a duty to present a correct version of the Constitution to the people. That is their excuse. And so the judge says, well, I don't have authority to order them to something that they don't have a duty to do. And so they denied me. And I am just dumbfounded that I even have to have this discussion with my government to fix the Constitution. It's one letter, but it changes the meaning, and it strips us of a constitutional right to address the government. And it seems to me the fact that they don't want to correct the Constitution, it says to me that they are actively oppressing this right, and they are afraid of it. And I tell you, when you call your senator and representative and you say the word remonstrance, they shiver up their spine because they're afraid of this constitutional right. So call your senator and representatives and tell them to uphold the right of remonstrance once again as intended by our founders. In the case, United States v. Cruikshank, 1876, Supreme Court of the United States, they said the right of the people to petition for redress of grievance is fundamental to our form of government. And just as that child in the back seat, you know, her government is mom and dad. And so it is fundamental to that family unit government that that child has a right to petition for redress of grievance, and the government, mom and dad, have a duty to correct that older sibling, just as our legislators have a duty to remove or impeach corrupt judges or to get bad police officers off of the state. So I want you to call them and tell them to uphold, and for God's sakes, please fix the Constitution while you're at it. Find me on social media. I have another remonstrance that I'm working on now. I'm gathering thousands, I hope tens of thousands of signatures of Tennesseans, and I'm going to present that petition to a member of the House, and I'm going to say the people are exercising their right to petition for redress of grievance, and we want you to begin welcoming petitions. We want you, there used to be, in the 1800s, there used to be a committee on propositions and grievances, and there used to be a committee on claims. So when citizens went in there and you know, the government messed up my fence when they were building a road, you would go to the committee on claims and they would pay you for your fence. If you had a grievance, you know, that a judge was corrupt, that would go to the grievances committee. Those committees no longer exist in any house in this entire country. And what they said when they got rid of those committees is, we don't care. And when they did that, they announced themselves tyrants and conduct themselves the way that the British ministry conducted itself against us. So call your senator and representative. Please tell your friends and family about this work that I'm doing. Find me through social media and sign that link and sign my remonstrance. I know in my heart two things have to happen. We have an absolutely corrupt judiciary. And the reason that we have a corrupt judiciary, which also is, by the way, how these state officials are able to get away with unlawful conduct like mass mandates, is because we have a corrupt judiciary that allows it. The reason that we have a corrupt judiciary is because in 1971 they created the Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct. And because they created that agency because there was a lot of corruption in the courts back in the early 70s. And that agency is comprised of judges. And so you got judges watching judges. And you got the fox watching the hen house. And it's not working. And they dismiss, I use their own annual report, they dismiss 100% of complaints that are filed against judges. Flat out, 100% of complaints are dismissed. And they have never once, since they were created in 1971, they have never once recommended removal or impeachment of a single judge. And so that agency are criminals protecting criminals. And that's why we have that problem. You know, so what I'm talking about here is justice. You cannot have justice if you do not have fair and impartial courts. And you cannot have fair and impartial courts if you don't have judicial oversight. And you can't be heard unless you have the right of petition for redress of grievance by address or remonstrance. This is the breakdown of our entire country, and this is the heart of my work, is to restore judicial accountability, to restore justice. Justice is love. It's God's love. And we must have justice. That was what our nation was founded on, was to create justice. Now this agency, I'm gonna jump back to the Tennessee Constitution and our federal Constitution. Why are the constitutions important? Well, we talked about the grievances, right? These declared acts of tyranny, all these crimes that they committed on the inhabitants of these states. And so they knew, you know, that we didn't want a monarchy. And so the constitutions create our form of government. And that is why the constitutions are so important. So Article 6, Section 7 of the Tennessee Constitution says no judge shall hold any other office of trust. So that Board of Judicial Conduct is an office of trust. Now, why do you think the founders put in the Constitution that judges shall hold no other office of trust? It's because they're not stupid. They went through this with the British ministry and corrupt magistrates of the British Crown. And they knew that that was perpetuated by other offices given to judges. And they know that judges are confidence men. They're tricky attorneys in black robes. That's all they are. So they put in the Constitution that no judge shall hold any other office of trust. And this is why we have to fight to defend the Tennessee Constitution, because it establishes our form of government. And when you have a government that steps out of its proper form by issuing mass mandates, by placing judges in prohibited offices, by oppressing the right to petition for redress of grievance by address or remonstrance, when you have that departure from your fundamental form of government, you have tyranny, you have oppression, and you have despotism. And that is what we have. And under Article 1, Section 2, it is absurd of us to not resist, to not protest. We have to start standing. We have to start talking to our fellow citizens. We have to instruct. So when you call your senator and representative, you tell them you're asserting your Article 1, Section 23 right to instruct them. And you tell them, I instruct you to correct the Tennessee Constitution. Last phrase of Article 1, Section 23. I instruct you to restore and uphold the right of petition by address or remonstrance. I instruct you to adhere to the Constitution of this state that was put in place by my forefathers. So my name is John Gentry. None of you guys are in my district. I'm running in Sumner, Trousdale, and part of Davidson County, up in Middle Tennessee. But I intend to seek statewide office in 2022 or 2024. So I hope you guys will keep up with my work. But I really want you to take action and call your senators and representatives. God bless, Godspeed to us all, and in God we trust.